The crack of a gavel shattered the tense silence as Grace Flynn stood trembling on the auction block, her emerald eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces beneath the merciless July sun of 1876. Whispers rippled through the crowd gathered in the dusty square of Silver Creek, Colorado, as the auctioneer announced the next item: a 22-year-old woman with no family, no money, and nowhere to go. Her contract of servitude the only thing standing between her and starvation. $5 for the girl, shouted a red-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth. 10, called another, his eyes raking over her in a way that made Grace's skin crawl beneath her threadbare dress. The bids climbed higher, each one sealing her fate to a stranger. Grace fought back tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her father, chasing dreams of a new life after her mother's death. Then the fever took him too, leaving her alone in a strange town with mounting debts and no prospects. $40, called a gruff voice from the back. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward. The sun silhouetted him dramatically broad shoulders, a worn Stetson pulled low, and a stance that commanded respect without asking for it. When he moved into the light, Grace could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a storm-laden sky. $40 going once. The auctioneer called, looking around the crowd with raised eyebrows. Twice. 50. Shouted a portly man who owned the saloon at the edge of town, his intentions written plainly across his flushed face. Without hesitation, the cowboy responded, 75. The saloon owner's face darkened. $100. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was an extraordinary sum for a servant contract. The cowboy stared directly at Grace, his expression unreadable. $150. The auctioneer looked expectantly at the saloon owner, who spat on the ground and shook his head. Sold. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. To Mr. Austin Quinn. Grace felt her legs go weak as relief and terror collided within her. Who was this man? What would he expect of her? At least he had saved her from the saloon owner's clutches, but for what purpose? Austin Quinn approached the auction block, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He handed the money to the auctioneer without a word, then turned to Grace. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, not from age but from squinting against the sun and wind. "Miss, I own a ranch 10 miles north of here," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm offering you honest work as a housekeeper, nothing more. You'll have your own room, regular meals, and fair treatment, if that's agreeable to you." Grace studied his face, searching for deceit but finding none. "Why would you pay so much for a housekeeper, Mr. Quinn?" A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Because everyone deserves a choice, Miss Flynn, even when it seems like they don't have one." The kindness in those words nearly undid her. She'd been prepared for cruelty, not compassion. "I accept your offer," she whispered, fighting to maintain her composure. He nodded once, then offered his hand to help her down from the platform. "My horse is this way." As they walked through the crowd, Grace felt the weight of stares and whispers. Austin's presence beside her created a buffer, his steady stride and straight shoulders communicating a clear message. She was under his protection now. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, stood patiently at the hitching post. Austin untied the reins and mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "I'm afraid it's a bit of a ride. You'll have to share the saddle." Grace hesitated only a moment before accepting his help, settling awkwardly in front of him. The intimacy of the position, his arms around her to hold the reins, his chest warm against her back, made her cheeks burn, but there was nothing improper in his manner. As they rode out of town, Grace finally allowed herself a deep breath. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, and the prairie stretched out before them like an ocean of grass. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a flicker of hope. "Mr. Quinn," she said over her shoulder, "I want you to know that I'm grateful and I'll work hard to earn my keep." "Austin," he corrected gently, "and I don't doubt you will, Miss Flynn." "Grace," she offered in return. "My name is Grace." They rode in companionable silence as the town of Silver Creek disappeared behind them. The rhythm of the horses' hooves and the vast openness of the landscape gradually eased the tension from Grace's shoulders. She wondered what awaited her at Austin Quinn's ranch, and whether she had truly found sanctuary or merely exchanged one form of bondage for another. The sun was beginning its descent when Austin pointed toward the horizon. There it is, Willow Creek Ranch. Grace squinted against the light and saw a sprawling property nestled in a valley. A modest but well-built house stood proudly among several outbuildings, a corral filled with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't the grandest ranch she'd ever seen, but there was something about its peaceful setting that tugged at her heart. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's Henry," Austin explained. "He's worked for my family since I was a boy, runs the place with me now." Henry approached with curious eyes as Austin dismounted and helped Grace down from the horse. "Didn't expect you back so soon," Henry said, his gaze moving from Austin to Grace. "And certainly not with company. Henry, this is Miss Grace Flynn. She'll be taking care of the house for us." Henry's weathered face crinkled into a smile as he tipped his hat. "Madam, it's a pleasure. Lord knows we could use a woman's touch around here." He shot Austin a questioning look that Grace couldn't quite interpret. "I'll show Grace to her room," Austin said. "Can you see to Valor?" Henry nodded and took the reins of the chestnut stallion. "Supper's almost ready, nothing fancy, just stew." "That sounds wonderful," Grace said sincerely. She couldn't remember her last proper meal. Austin led her to the house, pausing at the porch steps. "It's not much," he said, a hint of apology in his voice. "My father built it, added to it bit by bit over the years." "It's lovely," she assured him, and meant it. After weeks of uncertainty, any shelter felt like a palace. Inside, the house was simply furnished but clean and well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with comfortable-looking chairs gathered around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly full for a ranch house. "You read?" Grace couldn't help asking, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. Austin looked almost embarrassed. "When there's time. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She brought her love of books with her." "Where are your parents now?" Grace asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's not my business. It's all right. They passed within a year of each other about 5 years ago. Fever took my mother and my father." He paused. I think his heart couldn't bear being without her. The raw honesty in his voice made Grace's throat tighten. "I'm sorry for your loss. My mother died 3 years ago and my father just last month. I understand the emptiness they leave behind." Their eyes met in shared understanding, a bridge forming between them through common grief. Austin cleared his throat and gestured toward a hallway. "Your room is this way." He showed her to a small but pleasant bedroom at the back of the house. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a chest of drawers opposite, and a window overlooked a garden that had seen better days. "It was my mother's sewing room," Austin explained. "I hope it will be comfortable enough." "It's perfect," Grace said, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Mr. Quinn, Austin, I don't know how to thank you. There's no need. Like I said, it's honest work for fair treatment." He shifted his weight, seeming suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There's a washroom at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up before supper. I'll see if I can find some of my mother's old clothes that might fit you until we can get you proper things of your own." After he left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the soft quilt. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly breathe. The room was small but clean, the bed comfortable, and Austin Quinn had shown her nothing but kindness. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story and to his unexpected appearance at that auction than he was telling her. She rose and went to the window, looking out at the neglected garden. Vegetables grew haphazardly among encroaching weeds, and what must have once been flower beds had gone wild. Despite its untamed state, Grace could see the potential there. Perhaps tending this garden could be her first contribution to her new home, The word caught her by surprise. This wasn't her home, not really. It was employment, sanctuary, a reprieve from disaster. Yet as she watched the sun cast golden light across the valley, she couldn't help but feel a tentative sense of belonging. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Austin stood in the doorway, a bundle of clothing in his arms. "These were my mother's," he said, placing them on the bed. "They might need taking in, but they should serve until we can get to town." "Thank you." Grace fingered the simple cotton dresses and nightgowns, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Your mother must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." His expression softened with memory. "She would have liked you, I think." He seemed about to say more, then checked himself. "Supper will be ready soon. Take your time." After he left, Grace selected a faded blue dress from the pile. It was a bit loose around the waist, but otherwise fit well enough. She found a hairbrush in the dresser and did her best to tame her unruly auburn hair, wishing for a mirror. When she felt presentable, she followed the scent of cooking to the kitchen. Henry was stirring a pot on the stove while Austin set the table 3 mismatched plates and plain cutlery. They both looked up when she entered, and Austin's eyes widened slightly. "You look." He cleared his throat. "The dress suits you?" "Thank you for lending it to me," Grace said, embarrassed by the warmth his gaze kindled in her. "Can I help with anything?" "You can sit yourself down," Henry said firmly. "First night here, you're a guest. Work starts tomorrow." The stew was simple but delicious, rich with vegetables and tender beef. Grace hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She tried to eat with dignity, but it was difficult not to wolf it down. "So, Miss Flynn," Henry said as they ate, "where do you hail from originally?" "Boston," Grace replied. "My father was a carpenter. After my mother passed, he decided we should try our luck out west. He had a cousin in California who offered him work." She swallowed hard. "We never made it that far." "I'm sorry to hear that," Henry said kindly. "The journey west claims too many good people." "What skills do you have, Miss Flynn?" Austin asked, his tone practical but not unkind. "I can cook, clean, mend clothing. I helped my mother with household management and learned to keep accounts from my father. I can read and write well enough, and I know some basic nursing from caring for my mother during her illness." Grace straightened her shoulders. "I'm a quick learner and I'm not afraid of hard work." Austin nodded approvingly. "That's good. A ranch needs all sorts of skills." "Speaking of which," Henry interjected, "the Wilkins place lost 2 hands last week, headed to the mines in search of easier fortunes." He shook his head. "Fool's errand if you ask me. We're doing all right," Austin said. "Between you, me, and Tomas when he rides up from the south pasture we manage. For now," Henry muttered, "but Roundup's coming and we could use the extra hands." Grace listened with interest, piecing together the ranch's situation. It was clearly a working operation, not some wealthy man's plaything, and Austin and Henry seemed to handle most of the labor themselves. She wondered how much land they owned, how many cattle, and whether the ranch was prosperous or struggling. After supper, Grace insisted on washing the dishes despite Henry's protests. Austin excused himself to check on the horses one last time before nightfall, leaving her alone with the older man. "He's a good man, you know," Henry said as he dried a plate she handed him. "Best I've ever known after his father." "I believe you," Grace said carefully, "though I admit I'm still puzzled why he would pay so much for a housekeeper at an auction." Henry's weathered face grew serious. "Austin doesn't hold with treating people like property. His mother had strong views on such things and he inherited them." He paused. "But there's more to it. The man who was bidding against him, Harlan Pike, who owns the Red Garter Saloon, he's not known for his kind treatment of women." Grace shuddered, remembering the saloon owner's predatory gaze. "Austin's done this before," Henry continued. "Paid off debts, bought contracts, always gives folks a choice: honest work here or help getting somewhere else if they prefer. Most stay at least for a while." "And where are they now, these others he's helped?" Grace asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Gone on to better things, most of them. There was a young fella last year, not much more than a boy really, caught stealing. Austin paid his fine, brought him here to work it off. Boy's apprenticed to a blacksmith in Denver now, and a widow with 2 little ones a few years back. She's remarried to a shopkeeper over in Clearwater." Henry smiled. Austin never asks for gratitude, never expects anything in return except honest work while they're here. Grace felt both reassured and curiously disappointed by this revelation. Austin Quinn's kindness was apparently a habit, not something special he had extended to her alone. It was foolish to feel anything but grateful for that, and yet some small part of her had hoped. What? That he had seen something in her worth saving, that there had been some immediate connection. She shook off these fanciful thoughts. She was lucky to be here, lucky to have escaped a much worse fate. Austin's motives didn't matter as long as he kept his promise of fair treatment. "Thank you for telling me, Henry," she said, handing him the last plate. "It helps to know what kind of man I'm working for." Henry's eyes twinkled. "Just wait, you'll see for yourself soon enough." That night, Grace lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the creak of the house settling. Her mind whirled with the events of the day, from the terror of the auction block to the unexpected sanctuary of Willow Creek Ranch. Austin Quinn was an enigma, a rough-hewn cowboy with calloused hands who read leather-bound books and rescued strangers from servitude. A man whose quiet authority commanded respect, yet who spoke to her as an equal. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of his eyes storm-gray and haunted by something she couldn't name, something that resonated with the loneliness in her own heart. Dawn broke with a chorus of roosters and the clatter of activity in the yard. Grace dressed quickly in another of Mrs. Quinn's dresses, this one a faded green that complemented her eyes. She made her way to the kitchen, determined to prove her worth from the start. To her surprise, Austin was already there, coffee brewing on the stove and bacon sizzling in a pan. "Good morning," he said, glancing up from the stove. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Grace replied, trying not to show her surprise at finding him cooking. "Please let me take over, this is my job now." He stepped aside with a slight smile. "I've been cooking for myself and Henry for 5 years. It'll be a welcome change to have someone else do it." Grace took the spatula from him, their fingers brushing momentarily. She ignored the small flutter in her stomach at the contact. "What time do you and Henry usually eat breakfast?" she asked, focusing on the bacon. "Sunrise, most days," Austin said. "Earlier during roundup or branding. Henry should be in soon, he's just checking on a mare that's about to foal." Grace nodded, already planning the day's meals and tasks in her head. "Is there a larder I should know about? And do you keep chickens for eggs?" "Larder's through that door," Austin pointed. "Chickens are in the coop behind the house, about a dozen hens and a rooster with a mean streak. Garden's gone to seed since Mother died, but there's still some vegetables coming up. We get supplies from town every few weeks." "I noticed the garden," Grace said. "I'd like to work on it if that's all right." Austin's eyes brightened. "You garden," my mother taught me. "We had a small plot behind our house in Boston, not much, but we grew herbs and some vegetables." She flipped the bacon confidently. "A good garden could save you money on supplies." "That would be welcome," Austin admitted. "The ranch does all right, but we're not wealthy by any means." Grace appreciated his honesty. "I'll need to know what's expected of me daily, besides cooking and cleaning, I mean." "We can discuss that after breakfast," Austin said. "But mainly it's keeping the house, mending clothes, maybe helping with bookkeeping if you've a head for numbers." "The ranch work falls to me, Henry and Tomas." Henry arrived then, bringing the scent of the stables with him. His face lit up at the sight of Grace at the stove. "Now there's a sight for sore eyes," he declared. "A pretty woman cooking breakfast." Grace laughed at his enthusiasm. "Flattery will get you an extra slice of bacon, Mr. Henry." "Then I'll say you're as beautiful as the sunrise," he replied with a wink. Austin rolled his eyes, but there was fondness in his exasperation. "Don't encourage him, his head's big enough already." They ate breakfast together, the conversation flowing more easily than the night before. Grace learned that the ranch ran about 200 head of cattle, with plans to expand if the year's sales went well. Austin had been born in the house, while Henry had come west 30 years earlier seeking gold and found instead a lifelong friendship with Austin's father. "Never did find that gold," Henry mused, "but I found something better, a place where I belong." His words struck a chord in Grace. A place to belong wasn't that what everyone wanted, what she had lost with her parents' deaths. After breakfast, Austin took Grace on a tour of the ranch. The morning air was cool and sweet, the valley stretching out around them like a painting. He showed her the barn with its stalls of horses, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and the tool shed. They walked through the pastures where cattle grazed, and he pointed out the boundaries of the property, the creek to the east that gave the ranch its name, the rocky ridge to the north, the neighbor's land to the west. "It's beautiful," Grace said sincerely as they stood on a small rise overlooking the valley. "Your father chose well. He came out here with nothing but determination and my mother's unwavering faith in him," Austin said, pride evident in his voice. "Built everything you see with his own hands." "You've maintained it well," Grace observed. "He would be proud." Austin's expression softened. "I hope so." He turned to face her directly. "Miss Flynn, Grace, I want you to know that you're free to leave whenever you wish. The contract I purchased gives me no right to keep you here against your will. If at any time you want to go, just say the word." Grace was touched by his earnestness. "Thank you for saying that, though I have nowhere else to go, and please call me Grace, not Miss Flynn." "Grace, then." He said her name carefully, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "And I meant what I said yesterday. You'll be treated with respect here." "I believe you," she said simply. They walked back to the house in companionable silence. Grace felt a curious peace settling over her, as if the landscape itself were welcoming her home. The days fell into a rhythm. Grace rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning the house and her afternoons tending to the resurrected garden or mending clothes. She took pride in serving hearty meals to Austin and Henry, whose appreciative comments made her cheeks flush with pleasure. Austin was often gone from sunrise to sunset, returning dusty and tired but never too exhausted for a kind word or to ask about her day. Grace found herself looking forward to those evening conversations, to the way his serious face would sometimes break into a smile at something she said. A week after her arrival, Grace was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A young Mexican man rode into the yard leading a packhorse. "Señorita," he called, dismounting with fluid grace, "you must be Miss Flynn. I am Tomas Vasquez." "The South Pasture Hand," Grace said with a smile, recognizing the name. "Austin and Henry have mentioned you. All good things, I hope." Tomas grinned, revealing dimples in his handsome face. "I bring supplies from town. Where would you like them?" Grace directed him to the kitchen, where he unloaded sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. As he worked, he chatted amiably about the ranch, the weather, and the latest town gossip. "Everyone is talking about how Senor Quinn outbid Pike at the auction," Tomas said casually. "Pike is not happy. He is saying things." Grace's hands stilled on the flour sack she was storing. "What kinds of things?" Tomas looked uncomfortable. "It is not my place to repeat such talk." "Please," Grace said. "I need to know." Tomas sighed. "Pike is saying that Senor Quinn bought you for improper reasons, that he only pretends to be honorable." Grace's cheeks burned with anger and embarrassment. "That's ridiculous. Austin has been nothing but respectful." "Of course," Tomas said quickly. "Anyone who knows the patron knows he is a good man, but Pike has a cruel tongue and many listen to him." The conversation troubled Grace long after Tomas left to find Austin. She knew such gossip was inevitable given the circumstances, but it pained her to think that Austin's reputation might suffer because of his kindness to her. When Austin returned for supper that evening, Grace noticed a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He was quieter than usual, responding to Henry's banter with only half-hearted remarks. After Henry excused himself to his quarters in the converted bunkhouse, Grace began clearing the dishes. Austin remained at the table, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he hadn't asked. "Is everything all right?" Grace ventured. "You seem troubled." Austin looked up, surprise flashing across his face as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Just ranch matters, nothing for you to worry about." "Tomas mentioned that there's talk in town," Grace said carefully, "about the auction." Austin's jaw tightened. Tomas shouldn't be repeating gossip. I asked him to tell me, Grace admitted. I'm sorry if my presence here is causing problems for you. It's not your fault, Austin said firmly. Harlan Pike is a small man with a big mouth. His opinion means nothing to me. But it might mean something to others, Grace persisted. Your business relationships, your standing in the community, Grace. Austin cut her off, his voice gentle but firm. I don't regret what I did, not for a moment. The only thing that matters to me is that you're safe and being treated fairly. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tight with emotion. Why do you care so much about helping strangers? Austin was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to need help and not get it, he finally said. My mother taught me that we have a duty to each other as human beings. That no one should be left to face the world alone if we have the power to help. There was a story there. Grace sensed something personal that had shaped his worldview, but she didn't press. Instead, she reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for helping me, but for being the kind of man who would. Austin looked down at where her fingers had rested on his, a complicated expression crossing his face. For a breathless moment, Grace thought he might turn his hand over to clasp hers, but the moment passed, and he stood up abruptly. It's getting late, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I should check the horses before turning in. After he left, Grace finished cleaning the kitchen, her thoughts in turmoil. She was developing feelings for Austin that went beyond gratitude, feelings that both excited and frightened her. He had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, but he had never indicated any romantic interest. For all she knew, he saw her as nothing more than another unfortunate soul to help, like the boy he'd saved from jail or the widow he'd taken in. It would be foolish to mistake common decency for something more, she told herself sternly. Foolish and potentially disastrous, given her position in his household. She resolved to guard her heart more carefully and focus on being the best housekeeper she could be. The next morning dawned hot and clear, promising a scorching summer day. Grace had just finished preparing breakfast when Austin came in, followed by a clearly agitated Henry. What do you mean you're going alone? Henry was saying. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I've known you since you were in short pants. We can't both go, Austin replied calmly. Someone needs to stay and mind the ranch. Then take Tomas. He's checking the North Ridge cattle today. We can't afford to lose any more to that mountain lion. Grace interrupted their argument. Is something wrong? Austin sighed. Word came from the Wilkins place. A group of rustlers hit their herd last night and they're short-handed with 2 men gone. Sam Wilkins is asking for help tracking them. Rustlers? Grace's stomach clenched with worry. Isn't that dangerous? It can be, Austin acknowledged, but Sam's a good neighbor. He'd do the same for us. At least wait until Tomas gets back, Henry pleaded. Going after rustlers alone is asking for trouble. If I wait, the trail will go cold, Austin said with finality. I'll be back by tomorrow evening at the latest. He turned to Grace. There's no need to worry. This sort of thing happens from time to time out here. But Grace could see the concern in Henry's eyes, and it fueled her own anxiety. Austin was capable and strong, but he was still just one man against who knew how many thieves. After a hasty breakfast, Austin prepared to leave. He strapped on a gun belt, something Grace had never seen him wear around the ranch, and packed provisions in his saddlebags. Be careful, Grace said as she handed him a bundle of food for the journey. Please, Austin's eyes softened. I will. He hesitated, then added, if I'm not back by tomorrow night, Henry knows what to do. With that ominous statement, he mounted Valor and rode off, the rising sun casting his shadow long across the yard. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Grace threw herself into cleaning every corner of the house, trying to distract herself from thoughts of Austin facing down armed rustlers. Henry was equally restless, checking the horizon frequently and muttering to himself. By evening, the oppressive heat had built into a thunderstorm. Rain lashed against the windows as lightning split the sky. Grace served a quiet supper to Henry and Tomas, who had returned from the North Ridge with reports of spotting the mountain lion but no cattle losses. He'll be all right, Henry said, noticing Grace's worried glances toward the window. Austin knows these mountains better than anyone. Should we be concerned that he's out in this storm? Grace asked. Tomas and Henry exchanged looks. The patron is experienced, Tomas said carefully, but such weather can be dangerous in the mountains. Grace barely slept that night, listening to the storm rage outside and imagining Austin trapped somewhere in its fury. The next morning brought clear skies but no sign of the ranch owner. The day dragged on, each hour increasing Grace's anxiety. By sunset, with still no sign of Austin, even Henry's reassurances had turned hollow. "If he's not back by morning, I'm going to look for him," the older man declared. Grace was preparing a simple supper, her movements mechanical, when the dog started barking frantically outside. She dropped the spoon she was holding and rushed to the door, Henry and Tomas close behind her. A lone rider was approaching slowly, slumped in the saddle. Even from a distance, Grace could tell something was wrong. "Austin," she cried, running toward him. As she drew closer, she saw the dark stains spreading across his shirt. Austin's face was ashen, his normally alert eyes glazed with pain. "Found them," he murmured as Henry and Tomas reached them. "Got the cattle back to Wilkins. One of them had better aim than I thought." He tried to dismount, but his legs buckled. The men caught him before he hit the ground, supporting him between them. "Get him inside," Grace ordered, her fear giving way to decisive action. "Bring him to his bedroom. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey, and my sewing kit." They carried Austin to his room, laying him carefully on the bed. Grace cut away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal an ugly bullet wound in his left shoulder. "The bullet went through," she said, examining the entry and exit wounds. "That's good, but he's lost a lot of blood." For the next hour, Grace worked steadily, cleaning the wound, stitching both the entry and exit holes, and bandaging Austin's shoulder tightly. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally groaning but never complaining. When she had done all she could, Grace sat beside the bed, bathing his forehead with a cool cloth to combat the fever that had set in. Henry and Tomas hovered anxiously nearby. "You two should get some rest," Grace told them. "I'll stay with him." "You sure, miss?" Henry asked. "One of us could. I nursed my mother through a long illness," Grace said firmly. "I know what to do. I'll call if there's any change." Reluctantly, the men left. Grace settled into a chair beside Austin's bed, prepared for a long night. As midnight approached, Austin's fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed in the bed, muttering incoherently, reliving some past trauma in his delirium. "Don't," he moaned. "Please don't take her. I'll do anything." "SHH," Grace soothed, pressing a fresh, cool cloth to his burning forehead. "You're safe now. Everyone's safe." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his eyes open but unseeing. "I'm sorry, I couldn't save you." Grace's heart constricted. Elizabeth, a wife, a sister, someone he had lost, clearly, someone whose memory still haunted him. "It's all right," she murmured, though she knew he wasn't truly seeing her. "Rest now." Toward dawn, Austin's fever finally broke. He fell into a deep, healing sleep, his breathing becoming more regular. Grace, exhausted from her night-long vigil, allowed her head to drop onto the edge of the bed just for a moment. She woke to the feeling of fingers gently stroking her hair. Opening her eyes, she found Austin watching her, his gaze clear and alert. "You stayed," he said softly. Grace sat up quickly, embarrassed to have fallen asleep at his bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Austin admitted with a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." "You gave us quite a scare," Grace said, trying to sound stern but failing. Henry was ready to form a search party. "The rustlers were more numerous than I expected," Austin explained. "I tracked them to their camp, but there were 6 of them. I managed to stampede the stolen cattle back toward Wilkins' land, but one of them got off a lucky shot as I was leaving." 6 against 1? Grace couldn't keep the disapproval from her voice. "That wasn't brave, Austin. It was foolhardy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You sound like my mother." "Well, she would have been right to worry," Grace retorted, then softened. "You could have been killed." Something flickered in Austin's eyes at her obvious concern. "I'm tougher than I look," he said quietly. "Even tough men bleed," Grace replied, checking his bandage. "The wound is clean, but you've lost a lot of blood. You need to rest and regain your strength." I can't stay in bed, Austin protested. The ranch will survive a few days without you, Grace said firmly. Henry and Tomas are perfectly capable. Austin looked like he wanted to argue but was too weak to put up much of a fight. At least help me sit up a bit, he compromised. Grace arranged pillows behind him, acutely aware of his bare chest and the warmth of his skin beneath her hands. She tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but her pulse quickened traitorously. Over the next few days, Grace divided her time between her regular duties and nursing Austin back to health. She brought him meals on a tray, changed his bandages, and even read to him from his collection of books when he grew restless from confinement. These quiet reading sessions became her favorite part of the day. Austin would listen intently as she read Dickens or Twain, occasionally interrupting with thoughtful comments that revealed his intelligence and sensitivity. Sometimes their discussions would veer into personal territory, childhood memories, hopes, disappointments, and Grace found herself sharing things she had never told anyone else. Austin, too, gradually opened up. He told her about his parents' love story, how his father had been passing through Boston on business when he met his mother, a headstrong young schoolteacher who scandalized her family by following him west. He spoke of his childhood on the ranch, learning to ride before he could walk, his mother insisting on education alongside ranch skills. But there were gaps in his stories, moments when he would start to say something and then stop, changing the subject. And he never mentioned anyone named Elizabeth. One evening, as Grace was changing his bandage, she found the courage to ask, "Austin, who is Elizabeth?" His body went rigid beneath her hands. "Where did you hear that name? You called for her during your fever," Grace said gently. "You seemed distressed." Austin was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with old pain. "Elizabeth was my wife." The revelation shouldn't have surprised Grace. A man like Austin would naturally have been married, but it still sent a sharp pang through her heart. "I didn't know you were married. I'm not anymore." Austin stared at the wall, his expression distant. "She died 8 years ago along with our unborn child." "Oh, Austin," Grace breathed. "I'm so sorry." "We'd been married barely a year," he continued, the words coming as if a dam had broken. "I was in town when a group of men came to the ranch looking for work, they said. Elizabeth was here alone. They weren't looking for work." Grace's hand covered her mouth in horror. "They hurt her," Austin shook his head. "They never got the chance. She was frightened and tried to run. Her horse spooked at a rattlesnake, threw her badly by the time I got home." His voice broke. "By the time I got home, it was too late. She was gone and our baby with her." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "That's why you help people," she whispered, "because you couldn't help her." "I should have been here," Austin said, the self-recrimination still evident in his voice years later. "I should have protected her." Without thinking, Grace took his hand in both of hers. "It wasn't your fault, Austin. You couldn't have known." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a lightening of the burden he had carried for so long. "For years after, I couldn't imagine ever caring for anyone again," he said quietly. "Didn't want to risk that kind of pain. So I poured everything into the ranch, into helping others when I could. It was safer that way." "And now?" Grace asked, hardly daring to breathe. Austin's fingers tightened around hers. "Now I'm not so sure," he admitted. "These past weeks, having you here, it's woken something in me I thought was dead." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. Austin, a knock at the door interrupted them. Henry stood in the doorway, looking apologetic. "Sorry to intrude, but there's a visitor. Says it's urgent." Austin reluctantly released Grace's hand. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Miller from Silver Creek." Austin frowned. "Help me with a shirt, Grace. I'd better see what he wants." Grace assisted Austin into a clean shirt, their earlier moment of intimacy hanging unresolved between them. She helped him to the main room where a gruff-looking man in a sheriff's badge waited. "Quinn," the sheriff nodded. "Sorry to hear about your trouble with the rustlers. Glad to see you up and about. What brings you all the way out here, Sheriff?" Austin asked, lowering himself carefully into a chair. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Grace, then back to Austin. It's about Miss Flynn here. There's been a complaint filed. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. A complaint about what? Harlan Pike claims you're in breach of contract, the sheriff said uncomfortably. Says Quinn here purchased your service contract but isn't utilizing it properly. That's absurd, Austin said, his voice dangerously quiet. Miss Flynn works as my housekeeper exactly as the contract stipulates. Pike says the contract was for different services, the sheriff replied, not meeting either of their eyes. Says you're depriving him of fair business by not forcing me into prostitution, Grace finished, anger replacing her initial fear. Is that what he's claiming? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Something like that. He's demanding either your return to town for auction again or a substantial payment for lost business opportunities. That's not just absurd, it's illegal, Austin said firmly. The contract was for domestic service, nothing more. Sheriff, you were there, you saw the terms. I did, the sheriff acknowledged. And between you and me, Pike's full of hot air, but he's got influence with the town council and he's making a stink about it. So what exactly are you here for? Austin demanded. Officially, to inform you of the complaint and request that Miss Flynn return to town for a hearing before the Justice of the Peace next Monday. The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. Unofficially, to warn you that Pike's been drinking and making threats. He's got a few rough characters hanging around the saloon, and I thought you should know. Austin's jaw tightened. I appreciate the warning. After the sheriff left, Austin sat in grim silence, his face hard with anger. Grace paced the room, her own emotions in turmoil. I'll go to the hearing, she declared finally. I'll tell the justice exactly what happened and what kind of man Pike is. No, Austin said flatly. Pike has the justice in his pocket. He contributes generously to his re-election fund every year. Then what can we do? Grace asked, frustration evident in her voice. Austin was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words took Grace completely by surprise. Marry me, Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. What did you say? Marry me, Austin repeated, his eyes intent on hers. If you're my wife, Pike has no claim on you at all. No contract would supersede a marriage. But that's... Grace struggled to form coherent thoughts. Austin, you can't marry someone just to solve a legal problem. Why not? He rose from his chair with effort, moving to stand before her. It makes perfect sense. You need protection from Pike, and I need a wife. You need a wife, Grace echoed, hurt flooding through her. Just like that, any woman will do. No, Austin said forcefully, taking her hands in his. Not any woman. You, Grace, these past weeks, watching you bring life back into this house, seeing your strength and kindness. I've come to care for you in a way I never expected to care for anyone again. Grace's heart soared at his words, but caution held her back. You're still recovering, Austin. Your judgment might be my judgment is perfectly clear, he interrupted. I know this is sudden and I'm not doing this properly. You deserve poetry and courting and all the things a woman should have, but we don't have time for that now. But marriage. Grace whispered. That's forever, Austin. I know, he said simply. And I'm asking if you could imagine spending forever with me, here on this ranch, building a life together. Grace searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reluctance. She found only sincerity and something else, a vulnerability that touched her deeply. If we did this, she said carefully, I wouldn't want it to be just a legal arrangement. I would want a real marriage. Austin's expression softened. So would I, he said quietly. I think I've wanted that since the first week you were here, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. Because of Elizabeth, partly, he acknowledged, and partly because I didn't want you to feel obligated. You came here for safety, not to find a husband. Grace took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing. Ask me properly, she said. Austin looked momentarily confused, then understanding dawned in his eyes. Despite his injured shoulder, he lowered himself to one knee before her. Grace Flynn, he said, his voice steady and sure, I may not have known you long, but I know you're the woman I want beside me for the rest of my days. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Grace's eyes filled with tears of joy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Austin Quinn. He rose and pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of his injured shoulder. Their lips met in a tender first kiss that quickly deepened with the intensity of feelings too long held in check. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. "When?" Grace asked, still nestled in his embrace. "The hearing is Monday. Tomorrow," Austin said decisively. "We'll ride into Clearwater first thing in the morning. There's a preacher there who can marry us, and the town is outside Pike's influence." "Tomorrow," Grace's eyes widened. "But that's so soon." "I don't even have a proper dress, and you're still recovering," and Austin silenced her with another gentle kiss. "None of that matters. All that matters is that we'll be husband and wife before sunset tomorrow. The rest we'll figure out together." Henry and Tomas were summoned and informed of the plan. Henry's weathered face split into a broad grin. "About time you came to your senses, boy," he told Austin, clapping him carefully on his uninjured shoulder. "I've been watching you make moon eyes at each other for weeks now." Tomas offered enthusiastic congratulations and volunteered to ride ahead to Clearwater to inform the preacher and arrange accommodations for the night. Grace barely slept that night, her mind whirling with the sudden turn of events. Was she making a rash decision? She had known Austin for less than a month. Yet in that short time, she had seen his character tested in ways that revealed his true nature, his compassion, his integrity, his quiet strength. She had glimpsed his pain and witnessed his resilience. And somewhere along the way, without quite realizing it, she had fallen in love with him. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that seemed to herald new beginnings. Grace chose the best of Mrs. Quinn's dresses. A simple blue cotton that Austin once mentioned brought out the color of her eyes. She wished for a moment that her mother could be there to help her prepare, to offer the wisdom and advice a bride typically received. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Henry stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. "Austin asked me to give you this," he said, offering her the box with uncharacteristic solemnity. It was his mother's. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Grace opened it to find a small pressed wildflower preserved inside. "Indian paintbrush," Henry explained. His father gave it to his mother on their wedding day, said it matched her spirit, bright and strong and thriving where others couldn't. Tears pricked Grace's eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Will you help me put it on?" Henry fastened the chain around her neck, the locket resting just above her heart. "You know," he said gruffly, "in all the years since Elizabeth died, I've never seen Austin look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you brought the light back into his world." Grace touched the locket, drawing strength from its history. "Thank you, Henry, for everything." Austin was waiting for her in the yard, standing beside a wagon rather than his horse. He had dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and newly brushed hat. His injured arm was in a sling, but his eyes were clear and focused entirely on her as she emerged from the house. "You're beautiful," he said simply when she reached him. "Are you sure you're strong enough for this journey?" Grace asked, noting the lines of pain around his eyes despite his smile. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Austin assured her, helping her up into the wagon with his good arm. "Besides, Henry's driving. I'm just along for the ride." The journey to Clearwater took most of the morning. Grace and Austin sat close together in the back of the wagon, talking quietly about their hopes for the future, practical matters like running the ranch together, and more personal dreams of the family they might build. Each mile that passed strengthened Grace's certainty that she was making the right choice. Clearwater was a smaller, newer town than Silver Creek, with a white steepled church at its center. Tomas met them at the edge of town, informing them that the preacher was ready whenever they were. "And I found these," he added shyly, presenting Grace with a bouquet of wildflowers. "For the bride." Grace impulsively kissed his cheek, causing the young man to blush furiously. "Thank you, Tomas, they're perfect." The ceremony itself was simple and brief. The preacher, a kind-faced older man, welcomed them into his small church. A few curious townspeople, hearing that a wedding was taking place, filtered in to serve as witnesses. Grace hardly noticed them, her attention fixed on Austin as they exchanged traditional vows. "I, Austin James Quinn, take thee," Grace Elizabeth Flynn, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the sacred words. When it was her turn, Grace's own voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her heart was sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Austin drew her gently into his arms, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed their union and promised a lifetime of tomorrows. As they emerged from the church, the setting sun bathed the town in golden light. Austin paused on the steps, looking down at Grace with wonder in his eyes. "Mrs. Quinn," he said softly, testing the sound of her new name. Grace smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "It sounds right, doesn't it?" "It sounds like coming home," Austin replied, bending to kiss her once more as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of promise. The journey back to Willow Creek Ranch the next day was filled with a joyous anticipation that even the lingering threat of Harlan Pike couldn't diminish. Grace sat proudly beside Austin in the wagon, her hand often finding his as they planned their future together. "The first thing we should do is expand the garden," Austin suggested. "Grow enough to preserve for winter, and maybe add a few fruit trees," Grace ventured. "Apples and cherries would do well in this climate." "Whatever you want," Austin agreed readily. "This is your home now, to shape as you see fit." Home. The word filled Grace with a warmth she hadn't felt since her parents died. She had found not just shelter but belonging, not just safety but love. When they arrived at the ranch, Henry and Tomas had prepared a wedding feast with the best the ranch could offer. They ate outside under the stars, drinking to health and happiness, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time, Grace felt truly part of something, a family being forged through choice rather than blood. Later, when they were finally alone in what was now their bedroom, Austin took Grace's hands in his. "I know this all happened quickly," he said earnestly. "If you need time," Grace silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her newfound certainty into it. "I don't need time," she whispered against his lips. "I need you." The days that followed were filled with a domestic happiness that neither had dared hope for. Grace threw herself into making the house truly their home, while Austin, despite his still healing shoulder, insisted on showing her every aspect of the ranch operations. They worked side by side when possible, sharing the burden and the joy of their growing enterprise. News of their marriage spread quickly, reaching Silver Creek within days. The justice of the peace reluctantly dismissed Pike's complaint, as Austin had predicted. A wife could not be bound by a service contract predating her marriage, but Pike was not so easily defeated. Reports came back through Tomas that the saloon owner was drinking heavily and making increasingly violent threats against Austin, claiming he had been cheated and humiliated. "Let him talk," Austin said dismissively when Grace expressed concern. "He's all bluster," but Grace wasn't so sure. She had seen the malice in Pike's eyes at the auction, had sensed the dangerous pride in the man. Such men didn't accept defeat gracefully. A month after their wedding, Austin announced he needed to ride into Silver Creek for business at the bank. Despite her misgivings, Grace couldn't reasonably object. They needed supplies, and Austin's shoulder had healed well enough for regular work. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, kissing her goodbye. "Don't worry." But as the afternoon waned with no sign of his return, worry gnawed at Grace's composure. By sunset, she was pacing the porch, straining her eyes for any movement on the road from town. Henry found her there, her knuckles white as she gripped the porch railing. "He's probably just delayed at the bank," the older man said, trying to sound reassuring, "or stopped to have a drink with friends." "Austin wouldn't do that without sending word," Grace said firmly. "Something's wrong, Henry, I can feel it." Before Henry could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both turn toward the road. In the fading light, they could make out a rider approaching at a gallop. "That's not Austin's horse," Henry said, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle he kept by the door. As the rider drew closer, Grace recognized Tomas urging his horse to greater speed. He reined in sharply at the porch, his young face flushed with exertion and alarm. "Senora Quinn, Pike and his men cornered the patron in town," he gasped out. "There was a fight." Pike was shouting about getting what was owed him. The sheriff tried to intervene, but Pike's men outnumbered them. "They've taken Austin to the old mining camp in the hills." Grace's blood ran cold. "Taken him? You mean kidnapped him?" Tomas nodded grimly. Pike was very drunk, very angry. "He was saying terrible things about both of you. The sheriff was knocked unconscious and no one else dared interfere. I followed them as far as I could, then came back to warn you. We need to go after them," Grace said immediately, turning to Henry. "How many men would Pike have with him?" 4 or 5 likely, Henry said, his weathered face grim. "Too many for just Tomas and me to handle." "Then we need help," Grace declared, a plan already forming in her mind. "Tomas, ride to the Wilkins place. Tell Sam what's happened and ask for men. Henry, go to the Petersons' farm on the other side of the creek. They owe Austin for helping them during last year's drought." "And what will you do?" Henry asked, clearly alarmed by her commanding tone. Grace's eyes flashed with determination. "I'm going to change clothes and saddle a horse. I'll meet you both at the crossroads in half an hour." "Senora, no," Tomas protested. "It's too dangerous. Pike is not a rational man right now." "He's my husband," Grace said with quiet intensity. "I'm going." Recognizing the futility of arguing, Henry and Tomas departed on their missions while Grace hurried inside. She changed quickly into a pair of Austin's old trousers and a shirt, knowing a dress would be impractical for what lay ahead. From a drawer in their bedroom, she retrieved the small revolver Austin had insisted on teaching her to use. "Just in case," he had said at the time. "The ranch is isolated and I'm not always here." Grace had never imagined she might need to use it against other humans, but the thought of Austin in danger overrode any hesitation. She tucked the gun into her waistband and hurried to the stable. By the time she reached the crossroads, night had fallen completely. The moon provided just enough light to see Henry waiting for her, his face a mask of worry. "The Petersons are sending 2 of their hands," he reported. "They'll meet us at the trail junction to the old mining camp. Any word from Tomas?" "Not yet," Henry said, frowning at her attire. "Grace, I must insist that you stay back when we find them. Austin would never forgive me if anything happened to you." "I'll be careful," Grace promised. "But I'm coming with you, Henry. Don't waste time trying to convince me otherwise." The sound of approaching horses announced Tomas's return. He was accompanied by Sam Wilkins and 3 of his ranch hands, all armed and grim-faced. "Mrs. Quinn," Sam Wilkins said, tipping his hat. "Austin is a good neighbor and a better friend. We'll get him back." Grace nodded gratefully. "Thank you all for coming." "The old mining camp is about an hour's ride from here, correct? Less if we push the horses," Sam confirmed. "But we should approach carefully. The camp is in a box canyon with only one way in or out. If Pike has lookouts, we need a distraction," Henry suggested. "Something to draw their attention while the rest of us get into position." "I can be the distraction," Grace volunteered. "Absolutely not," Henry said flatly. "Austin would have my hide." "Pike wants me," Grace persisted. "That's what this is all about, his wounded pride because he couldn't buy me at the auction. If I appear at the canyon entrance alone, he'll be so focused on me that you all can circle around and take them by surprise." "It's too risky," Sam argued. "It's our best chance," Grace countered. "Pike may be drunk and angry, but he's not a killer. He wants to humiliate Austin to prove he can take what Austin values most. He won't shoot me on sight." There was reluctant agreement among the men that her plan, while dangerous, made tactical sense. They rode toward the mining camp, discussing the details in low voices. When they were within a quarter mile, they dismounted to continue on foot. The old mining camp was visible now, a cluster of decrepit shacks, and the skeleton of what had once been the mine entrance, illuminated by a large campfire. Grace could make out several figures moving around the fire and a larger shape that had to be Austin, apparently tied to a post from an old corral. "I count 5 men besides Pike," Sam whispered, "all armed." "I'll give you 20 minutes to get into position," Grace said, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "When you hear me call out to Pike, that's your signal." Before anyone could raise further objections, she handed the reins of her horse to Tomas and began making her way down toward the canyon entrance. The revolver was a reassuring weight against her waist, hidden by Austin's oversized shirt. The closer she got to the camp, the more clearly she could hear Pike's drunken ranting. "You think you're better than the rest of us, Quinn. Think you can make a fool of me in front of the whole town?" Grace couldn't hear Austin's response, but it clearly angered Pike. The sound of a blow landing made her flinch and quicken her pace. When she reached the edge of the firelight, Grace took a deep breath and stepped into view. "Harlan Pike," she called, her voice ringing through the canyon. "I believe it's me you want." All heads turned in her direction. Pike, a bottle dangling from one hand, squinted at her in disbelief. "Well, look what we have here," he slurred. "Mrs. Quinn herself, come to join the party." Grace walked forward steadily, her gaze fixed on Austin. His face was bloodied, one eye swelling shut, but his expression when he saw her was one of horror rather than relief. "Grace, get out of here," he shouted. "Run, shut up," Pike growled, striking Austin again before turning back to Grace. "What are you doing here, woman?" "I've come to make a deal," Grace said calmly, stopping a few yards away from Pike. "Let my husband go and I'll come with you willingly." Pike laughed incredulously. "You'll come with me, just like that." "Just like that," Grace confirmed. "On one condition, Austin rides away unharmed." "Grace, no." Austin struggled against his bonds, desperation in his voice. "Don't do this." Pike looked between them, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well, ain't this touching, the little woman offering to sacrifice herself." He took a step toward Grace. "But here's the problem, Mrs. Quinn, I don't want you anymore. What I want is to watch your husband suffer, knowing I took everything from him, just like he took from me." "You're drunk, Pike," Grace said evenly, "and you're making a terrible mistake. The sheriff will be looking for Austin." "Do you really want to add murder to your crimes?" Pike's face darkened. "You think I care about that? My reputation is ruined because of you two. Nothing left to lose now." "There's always something left to lose," Grace said, taking another step forward. She was stalling now, giving the rescue party time to get into position. "Your freedom, your life." "Brave words from a woman surrounded by 6 armed men," Pike sneered. "I'm not surrounded," Grace replied, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "They are." On cue, shots rang out from the darkness around the canyon. 2 of Pike's men fell immediately, while the others dove for cover, returning fire wildly into the night. In the confusion, Grace drew her revolver and ran toward Austin. One of Pike's men tried to intercept her, but she fired without hesitation, catching him in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry of pain. "Behind you," Austin shouted. Grace whirled to see Pike himself charging toward her, rage contorting his features. She aimed the revolver at him, her hand steady. "Stop right there," she commanded. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will." Pike hesitated, calculating his chances, then lunged forward again. Grace fired, the bullet grazing his arm. He howled in pain but kept coming. Before she could fire again, Pike crashed into her, sending them both to the ground. The revolver flew from her hand. Pike's hands closed around her throat, his face a mask of drunken fury. Grace clawed at his wrists, fighting for breath, consciousness beginning to fade at the edges of her vision. Suddenly, the pressure was gone. Through watering eyes, she saw Austin standing over them, his hands still bound but a heavy piece of wood gripped between them. Pike lay unconscious at his feet. "Grace," Austin gasped, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you all right? Grace, speak to me." "I'm fine," she managed, her voice hoarse. "Let me untie you." With trembling hands, she worked at the ropes binding his wrists. By the time she had freed him, the gunfire had stopped. Sam Wilkins approached, his rifle in hand. "It's over," he reported. "2 of Pike's men are dead, the rest have surrendered." "Pike, alive," Austin said grimly, pulling Grace protectively against him, "though he's lucky to be so." The ride back to the ranch was slow and solemn. Pike and his surviving men were bound and loaded into a wagon to be delivered to the sheriff. Austin, despite his injuries, insisted on riding his own horse with Grace mounted behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist as if afraid he might disappear again. It was nearly dawn by the time they reached Willow Creek Ranch. Henry insisted on treating Austin's injuries while Grace prepared hot coffee and food for the men who had risked their lives to help them. When everyone had finally departed and the house was quiet once more, Grace found Austin sitting on the edge of their bed, his face troubled despite her careful cleaning and bandaging of his wounds. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly as she sat beside him. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Grace replied simply. "Would you have stayed behind if it had been me Pike took?" Austin's expression softened. "No, of course not." "Then don't ask me to be less than you would be," Grace said, taking his hand in hers. "For better or worse, remember." "Those weren't just words to me, Austin." He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of both their injuries. "I've never been so scared as when I saw you walk into that camp," he confessed, "and never so proud." "We protected each other," Grace said softly. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Facing the world together, whatever comes." "Whatever comes," Austin repeated, sealing the renewed vow with a tender kiss. In the days that followed, news arrived from town. Harlan Pike was being held for kidnapping, assault, and the deaths of his men. The sheriff, recovering from his own injuries, had sworn out a warrant detailing Pike's crimes. Justice, it seemed, would be served. Life at Willow Creek Ranch gradually returned to normal. Austin's injuries healed, leaving only a small scar above his eye as a reminder of that night. Grace's garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for the house. Together, they worked to make the ranch more prosperous than ever, their partnership strengthening with each passing day. 6 months after their hasty wedding, Austin surprised Grace with a special dinner to celebrate their half-year anniversary. Henry and Tomas were conspicuously absent, giving them rare privacy. "I have something for you," Austin said after they had eaten, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside lay a delicate gold band set with a single pearl. "I know our wedding was rushed," Austin said, a hint of shyness in his expression. "You deserved better than a hurried ceremony to outmaneuver Pike. This is the ring I would have given you if we'd had time to do things properly." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect complement to the simple gold band she already wore. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I wouldn't change a thing about how we came together, Austin. Every step led us here to this life we're building." "And what a life it will be," Austin said, his eyes shining with love and a secret joy. "Especially now." Grace smiled, placing her hand over her still flat stomach where new life was just beginning to grow. "I was going to tell you tonight. How did you know? You've been glowing these past few weeks," Austin said, covering her hand with his own. "And you haven't had coffee in the mornings, though you don't think I've noticed." Grace laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "You see everything?" "Only what matters most," Austin replied, drawing her into his arms. "You, our family, our home." As the sun set over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Grace leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. From the auction block to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a journey neither could have predicted, yet one that had led exactly where they were meant to be. "I love you, Austin Quinn," Grace whispered as darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast western sky. "And I love you, Grace Quinn," he replied, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. "Until the last sunset and beyond."